Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Riding with Gravity. I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the FuelX Lite. And this applies a little bit to the Pro, but I'm talking specifically about the FuelX Lite, where you don't have multiple mappings in how you set up the regulation of fuel. Let's talk first about what the FuelX Lite does. And I've been riding around long enough now with it that I can tell you a little bit from mostly I want to talk from personal experience, but what does the FuelX Lite do? Well, if you see from the video, you're interrupting the O2 sensor and giving a new signal that is optimized for the right fuel mixture. What this really means is these bikes run pretty lean in the stock configuration, particularly in the closed loop where they're using that O2 sensor, and that's lower rev ranges. And so the FuelX Lite will adjust, and it will adjust based on your riding style, the weather conditions, mods that you've made to the motorcycle, and it's kind of constantly auto-tuning, auto-correcting for those things to optimize. So in and of itself, it's a great mod. You don't need to do this with any other mods. It's just a really good one. It smooths everything out. And you'll hear a lot of people, myself included, say it's really, really smooth, particularly at low speeds. Well, that's because these bikes run lean, and so ultimately you'll use more fuel. So it's usually not well understood, I guess, or that maybe it's not talked about very much. But you need a richer fuel mixture, generally speaking. So yeah, your bike will use more fuel because it's running so lean in the stock configuration, right? You should have a cooler engine. It'll help protect the engine, and because it adjusts for some of your mods, if you're doing some of these small simple mods that add a little horsepower here and there, then it can really help as well in just generally protecting your motorcycle engine. But it's important to note that, well, what does it do? You're mostly adjusting the inputs that would come from the O2 sensor where the bike is running lean. At higher revs, the O2 sensor is ignored. It's kind of like this. We're going fast enough, the ECU is like, oh my gosh, we're going so fast, I'm just going to ignore you. I'm going to give you a bunch of fuel. Here you go, here's a bunch of fuel. I know we're going really fast. I don't have time to go talk to the O2 sensor. Here's a bunch of fuel. I'm using that as a creative analogy. The reality is that once it gets into open loop, it's not listening to the O2 sensor, and the fuel regulation is coming out of the ECU. So what does that mean? It means that the FuelX Lite is still a very valuable mod, and when you're doing these simple things like I did, the K&N high performance air filter, the DNA air filter, that stage 2 to replace the airbox cover, a slip-on exhaust. You don't necessarily need it for the slip-on exhaust, but again, subtle changes. It really will help protect your engine, and that is a good thing. But at higher revs, it's not really doing a whole lot, right? Because it's not your bike's not listening to the O2 sensor. It's just giving it fuel based on the ECU settings. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but what do you need to know about it? Well, generally that fuel mixture is richer. So, okay, in riding around, I haven't seen any issues. I'm not getting any knocking in my engine. That's one of the symptoms that you might hear. Everything seems to be just fine, so I'm not terribly worried. But in reality, your bike is still not fully optimized. And that's the important thing, right? So the configuration of doing the K&N high performance air filter, the DNA air filter, that stage 2 to replace the airbox cover, doing a slip-on exhaust, these are very, very common mods, and a very common setup is to do those mods with the FuelX Lite. So it's a very common, but it's important to note that your bike is still not completely optimized until you do something else. So what is that something else that you could do for the open loop scenarios, right? Because at that point we're relying on the stock ECU still. You can go get your motorcycle tuned, right? And just go have it tuned and have them adjust all those settings and recalibrate your ECU. That is one option. The other thing you could do is you could look at installing something else as a piggyback on the FuelX Lite, like a performance ECU, right? I've been thinking about a Powertronics model of an ECU, right? So there's different things that you might consider. But again, it's worth noting, and I think it's an important thing to consider when you're looking at your whole setup.